Hey, I don't know if you're like me, but I have Alexa. And if you don't know what Alexa is, then never mind. But if you do know what Alexa is from Amazon, you can use Alexa for all kinds of things. And they have free apps, or some you have to pay for, some are free. If you use Alexa, you can use my app. I have an app called Daily Christian Encouragement. You can download it for free, listen to it every day. And if you don't know what this is, or this is confusing to you, go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, click on the podcast, and you can scroll down. You'll see on the left side exactly how to do it. Now, all you have to do is enable the skill, Daily Christian Encouragement, and then you ask her, what is my flash briefing? That's it. So go to my website, davidpendergrass.com. It'll tell you more. Also, if you're like me, you like encouragement. In addition to that app, if you don't have Alexa, or if you do, you can get that as well. But also, you can have me text you. Did you know that? Maybe you don't care. That's fine with me. But if you do, and you like to receive free text of encouragement, hey, here you can sign up. All you got to do is, on your cell phone, text the number 555-888. And you text this word, DP Ministries, and that's it. It will sign you up and you're ready to go. That's it. So one more time, 555-888. You text the word, all one word, DP Ministries, David Pendergrass Ministries, DP Ministries, plural. That's it. And you'll sign up. Now, of course, it's free to sign up, but your cell phone carrier charges you texting charges like any cell phone does. So if you want that, 555-888, DP Ministries. I send out random encouraging texts. And of course, you have the Alexa app, go for that. Tell your friends about it. Even you can tell your friends about the encouraging text if you want. God bless. Hope it helps. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass. At the time of this recording, last night, there was a debate between William Lane Craig and a guy named Dr. Hester, Hester, who is an astronomer, I guess astrophysicist. I'm exactly sure exactly what his exact title is, but he is one. And the name of the debate was called, Is Theistic Belief Rational in a Scientific Age? So, is theistic belief rational in a scientific age? William Lane Craig versus Jeff Hester is his name, by the way. Jeff Hester is at the College of the Holy Cross on April 9th, 2019. And I just want to make a few reflections on this debate. It was kind of a debate dialogue. I guess it was a debate, but it was not like Craig's usual stuff, which I kind of liked. As far as the title goes, Is Theistic Belief Rational in a Scientific Age? There are a few things pop up right at the beginning. But something Craig did, first off, Craig was his usual genius self. This is one of the most slam dunk cases of any kind of discussion debate. I don't get embarrassed much, certainly not for other people, but I was a little embarrassed for the other guy. And the other guy, I'm sure, is just a brilliant astrophysicist. But I mean, this was 100% on the side of Craig. The other guy didn't make one single argument or point. It was just, anyway, Craig was at his finest. And I'm not, if you're, I don't know, atheists will listen to this and get so upset and say I'm being biased. Well, maybe I am being biased, but as much as I can be unbiased, this was a clear domination by Craig when it came to the ideas. Both were nice guys, just the ideas. But something Craig did when he started out, my first point is he defined, before he gave his little talk, he say, first off, what does this question mean? And I'm so glad he did that. That's the right thing to do. Is theistic belief rational? And he says, well, I guess theistic belief is a fancy way of saying, do you believe in God? The typical theistic understanding of God, an all-powerful designer, creator of the universe, who's also good, like a minimalist approach to theism, which is fine by me, by the way. And is it rational? That is, can a person be rational to hold the view? And of course, in scientific age, particularly a Western scientific age, an age where a person practices science. So Craig said, if that's the case, then we reword this as, can you believe in God and be rational if you're a scientist? And I think it's the way he should have done it. Should have phrased his discussion. So he's have two responses. First is absolutely, clearly, yes. Of course you can be. And the way to do that is give plenty of examples. And he gave, I think, half a dozen examples of brilliant scientists in the world right now, brilliant ones who are, these people win top awards. They're the president of this and that, and they're Christians. One guy, in fact, converted later in life. Craig said at the height of his scientific career, he converted to be a Christian. So we'll give examples of that. And later on, the guy responded and said, well, maybe I'll get that in just a second. So I'm not going to critique that. The first point yet is that right now is that's the first thing Craig said was that's the first major argument. Second major argument to say the answer is yeah, you can believe in God and be a scientist is that there are reasons to believe in God. Now, that's what he did. Before I get too much into this discussion, I kind of doing preface right now. I want to just give you some reflections. Like I said, what I think, do what you will, but I'm also going to use this as a time to perhaps encourage you when you discuss religion and Christianity in particular with skeptics or atheists. And there were things that Craig mentioned, things he didn't and whatnot. But I'm not going to do a 4-hour review, but I just want to make some highlights, some things that really stood out to me. The first thing is this. While the title certainly is important, the first thing that stood out to me, of course, is scientific age. And I've said this in other podcasts, but it's worth repeating. You need to understand when a person uses the word scientific age, that expression, scientific age, or science, or to be a scientist, they are not appealing to a world view. They might be implying it, but they're not saying it. All they're saying is, can you believe or trust in or utilize the methodology called scientific methodology? That's it. Can you use the scientific method to arrive at truth about reality? That's it. Not all truth or reality. That's not what science does. It's just any kind of truth that science can discover. Now, you need to make sure, I'm trying to encourage you here because a lot of Christians, in my experience, at least seeing online, they get really bent out of shape on this one because they think, well, quite frankly, that it's Christianity versus science, or it's any kind of religion versus science. Now, atheists typically make it that way. You have to be either a theist or a scientist. That demonstrates the overwhelming ignorance that they possess. Science is not opposed to Christianity. That makes no sense at all. You might as well say, is science opposed to poetry? Is science opposed to architecture? It makes no sense. It's completely a science opposed to culinary arts. Can you be a chef and believe in science? This is nonsense. It's completely unrelated. Christianity is a worldview. Science is a methodology. This is a classic case of what's called a category error in logic. They're not the same. Not just apples and oranges, they're apples and horses. They're very different things. So it is instantaneously a sign of ignorance about the whole discussion if a person even raises the question this way. Can a person still believe in God and practice the methodology of science? Answers, of course you can. There's nothing about the methodology of science that has anything to do with the worldview of Christianity. This is the one area where people say, well, David, they're very similar, and that they're both have an epistemology. And that just means they have a way of knowing things. True, they do have ways of knowing things, but Christianity is a worldview, and part of the worldview is how they come to know things. Christianity historically has allowed just about every single kind of methodology used to discover truth. Sure, great. But science stops there. Science is not a worldview. It's not a person. It's not a belief outside of a belief in a particular methodology. So the first question I would have said if I were Craig, and I'm not Craig, Craig's much smarter than I am, but if I were the debate, I would say automatically whoever named this, I'm not making fun of them, but if you're in the audience and you thought this was a real clever question, the answer is, my response is, then you don't know what science actually means or what belief in God actually is. You don't know what these things mean. So I would have spent that first step explaining that. Craig kind of alluded to, but not much that I recall in his opening comments or ever. Another thing that really stood out to me was when Dr. Hester started in on his discussion. The first thing he said was, well, Craig said, clearly there are scientists who are theists, therefore, that here's an example. And he said, yeah, but even Albert Einstein, he didn't believe in quantum theory. So it goes to show you, just because a person believes they're a scientist doesn't mean they're always rational. Now, of course, right off the bat, I thought, I can't believe, unless Hester's making the argument that Einstein had a phobia, that is a literal psychological disorder against quantum theory, then it's silly to say he suffered from some kind of irrationality for it. Well, Craig came back to that and made a similar point but different, and said, I mean, he was astonished by that, and he should have been, Craig was, and he said Einstein was not against quantum theories, against quantum indeterminacy. But he just didn't believe for the reasons, he had his reasons for not believing it, but that doesn't mean he was irrational. He was an irrational person, nor did it mean that he was irrational to not believe in quantum indeterminacy. He just thought it was wrong. Now, today, if he lived, he'd probably believe in it, probably because the data is much better than it was back then, almost 100 years ago. Well, as we say, 80 and so forth. But 20s, 30s, 40s, back when they didn't know much at all about quantum, that's from which Einstein came. So the first thing it lets me know is, that Hester is like so many scientists who are atheists, and it's this. There's a common belief they have, and it really is this. You cannot be both a scientist and a theist, because it must mean you're stupid, or you hold to stupid beliefs. Now, it's not, sometimes they will nuance it better and say, well, no, you can be really, really smart. It's just some of the beliefs are really, really irrational. They're completely irrational. So you're very rational and lucid and brilliant and everything else, but this one area. People ask Peter Atkins, who's a professor or was at Oxford, they talk about the same thing. He said, you can't believe in both, and the people are stupid and irrational, and John Lennox and others always come back and say, yeah, what about so-and-so, what about so-and-so? And he says, it's onset of senility. It's senility. They are senile. They're literally losing their mind. Well, he didn't say that, but it implies it. And then Craig came back to that later on at the very end and said, I think such a view is condescending and arrogant. To think, and he listed all these scientists' names and said that these people are irrational just because they happen to be theists is just nonsense. And I agree with him. Well, that's my first major point, but to encourage you, when you talk to people on the streets, your colleagues, your family members, it is usually a fair assumption that that's probably what they think as well, if they're a little more dyed-in-the-wool atheist. The average skeptic and atheist may not have that view. And as I say a billion times, I have said a billion times on podcasts, throughout all the years I've done this, that is, don't ever assume you know what they believe. Don't assume it in your conversation. Always ask them what they believe. But to save time and to keep you more prepared, I do give you tips on some assumptions that it will help you to be informed about these views. And then if they say, yeah, that is my view, then you're ready to go. If it's not their view, then great. So what? You need whatever. But my point here is there are numerous skeptics and atheists who do believe, just like he does, Hester does, and Peter Atkins, and so many others, that you can't do both. You can't be both. And you'll have to address that. You have to think about it ahead of time and then address it like Craig did in the debate and so forth. But it is a common assumption they have. Another reflection I think worth making is, at one point, Hester, the atheist, said that he used to be a Christian. And I can't remember exactly how he said it. I used to go to church and so forth. But then one day, and I can't remember what happened one day, but basically one day, he said, I wanted to decide whether or not God really existed. So I researched for 6 months and came to the conclusion, or I discovered, no, he doesn't. Now, several things popped out to me when he said that, and he was very proud when he said that, and it was the presumption on every single word he said was, and I'll come back to that in a second, the presumption he had was that God doesn't exist, and therefore everyone who believes it is irrational, and they do it because they're just evolved chimps, basically. But when a person says, I used to be a Christian, then I went on a research to discover if God exists. Now, I don't know about you. Did something stand out to you? If a person told you, I used to be married, and then one day I said, you know what? I'm going to try to decide whether or not a spouse really exists. I'm going to decide. I'm for 6 months, I'm going to do some research to decide whether my spouse exists. Well, I find that very problematic. If a person says, I was a Christian, and then goes on a pursuit to decide whether or not God exists, you can not have ever been a Christian. It's impossible. Sister, brother, whoever, if you're listening to this right now, I don't care if you're a skeptic, whomever, I mean, please read the New Testament, even just one time, and you'll see how silly what he said is. If you are a Christian, you believe Jesus existed and exists, and he's the reigning Lord over the universe with God the Father and the God the Spirit, and you give yourself to him, and that his spirit comes inside of you and makes you alive when you once were dead, and you are now dead to your sins, and you're made to live and alive in Christ Jesus. You are in Christ. You have been crucified with Christ, as Paul said. I think he's exactly right. That's a good metaphor for Christians. We have died with Christ. So Christianity is not just intellectual assent, I think that God might exist. It is a dynamic, organic, alive relationship with the God of the universe. You talk to him, you listen to him, you have a dynamic relationship. And if that's not true for you, then you are not a Christian. You're not a Christian. And I've met many people who come from different faith traditions who call themselves Christian, and they were never taught this. They were never taught that Christianity is literally and actually, not metaphorically, but literally and actually, a relationship with the risen Lord. A relationship with the risen Jesus. Like I have a relationship with my children, my wife, my friends, the male woman, the male man. I have relationships, whatever. I have a relationship with Jesus. I don't have relationships with Moses. He's dead. Or Abraham, or David, or Muhammad, or Confucius, or Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington. I don't have relationships with them. They're just dead historical figures. Christianity has always taught from the very, very beginning that, and in fact, what we have is a love relationship with the resurrected Jesus. So that stood out to me immediately as, what in the world just happened? How did you go from that to that? And the second thing is, when he just discovered God wasn't there, I was so excited to hear, I mean this, I was looking forward to, great, what did he discover that no other Christian thinker in the history of Christianity has been able to discover? What is it? Really? And what did he discover in 6 months that would overturn 2,000 years of belief for the church? Well, let's be realistic for a second. A lot of people who claim to be Christians aren't, historically. Okay, let's say 90% weren't. I'm just for fun's sake, 90%. That's 10. Let's say 10% of Christians for 2,000 years still believe. That's a lot. That's hundreds of millions of people over 2,000 years. Well, why is it? Why do they still believe? What do that know? What do I not know? Craig doesn't know, and any other Christian thinker or historian ever in the history of the world. And you know what his answer was? Well, listen to the debate. The answer was, we evolved. His answer is, we evolved. We're just evolved primates. And the reason why people believe in gods is because it's adaptive to their survival, and people are prone to see agency where there is no agency. He thinks that when the bushes blow wind in it and a dog gets scared, he said dogs think there's something in the bush. I was so looking forward to hear how he could tell me how he knows what dogs think, since dogs can't communicate. It could just as easily be the case that dogs get scared at certain sounds because they do not know what the sound was, not because they know and had a false belief about their inner knowledge. Anyway, that's the answer. So he gave the answer that Christopher Hitchens used to give every single debate until he died, every single discussion until he died, and it was this: we all know atheism is true, we all know there is no God, so let's explore where the belief in gods came from. It came from evolution. It helped us survive. Now, we're still, unfortunately, hung on to for dear life of that old, stupid backwoods belief. And then, why is it so hard to get rid of this old backwoods belief Dr. Hester spent so long on? That is because we're all part of tribes. Tribalism. That's it. We're all tribes, and tribes force us what to believe. And you have to have most people believe in one thing and some people believe in the opposite thing to keep it healthy and keep surviving. Now, I was thinking all this whole time, and Craig brought it up too, Hester is immune from tribalism. He's immune. He's broken free from the slavery of evolution and tribalism. Now, let that sink in. He has broken free from billions of years of evolution that's produced his brain, and that's it. You don't have a mind, and I'll talk about that in a second. He didn't believe we had a mind at all. We're just brains operating on naturalistic laws. The reason why he broke free from something from which no one can break free, because why? We're all forced to believe what we believe by our tribe. He can do it because why? Science freed him. Science freed him. That was it. So I'd say praise God, but praise the great ape, praise Mother Earth, praise the universe, that scientists discovered something to get them free from us ignoramus chimps that can't grasp these truth concepts. I mean, I'm so happy for the atheist scientists who are free. And that's exactly what they actually do believe. That there is no God. Why? Because he can't find it in a microscope or a telescope, so he's not there. So if you believe in him, you have to believe it, not because necessarily you're a villain, but mostly because you're an idiot. Well, if you're not an idiot, you've been brainwashed and conditioned by your tribe. That's it. That's what every single person says who's not a philosopher. If they're an atheistic scientist, that's what they say. And that's all what Hester said over and over and over. So what Hester did in his discussion was literally give about half a dozen to 10 arguments that the reason why people believe this is because this. They believe this because this. They believe this because this. He said the one place that Christians still think that God might have some answer to this God of the gaps, that's always the response to, is the mind. The problem is there is no mind. There is no mind. I'll come back in just a second and talk more about that. Stay with me.
Do you know of any skeptics in your family, at work, or among your friends? Do you struggle with questions concerning the existence of God or the truth claims of Christianity? Has a skeptic ever challenged you with a difficult question concerning your faith? Then you need to buy Dr. Pendergrass's book, A Skeptic Challenges a Christian, on Amazon.com. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle or in audiobook form to listen to. A Skeptic Challenges a Christian is written unlike any other book. It's not boring and full of technical jargon. It reads like you're sitting down having a conversation. As one reviewer said, "As a college student, I absolutely love this book. Dr. Pendergrass knows how to effectively answer a lot of the questions that my friends at school ask about my faith. This book is a great resource for theological debates and for my own personal growth. The arguments are clear and understandable. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who has questions about Christianity, wants to learn how to defend their faith, or even just wants a good read. Great book." Find out why it has a perfect 5-star rating on Amazon.com. A Skeptic Challenges a Christian. Buy your copies today. Ever wonder what God wants you to do with your money? Should I give it all away or save? What did the early church do with their money? In Dr. Pendergrass's book, Give It Away, Reflections on How Christians Use Money, you'll get 4 short, powerful lessons on what to do with money based on some key texts from the New Testament. This is a wonderful guide for study and reflection. It even comes with reflection questions that are perfect for small group discussions. Give It Away, Reflections on How Christians Use Money. Buy your copies today on Amazon.com. Do you like receiving a glimpse of the kingdom for free? Would you like to support what God is doing through these resources? Then please consider donating to David Pendergrass Ministries, Inc. today at davidpendergrass.com. There, you can also sign up to receive Dr. Pendergrass's free blog on a wide range of theological, biblical, and relationship issues. That's davidpendergrass.com.
So Hester said there is no mind. None. Now why is that? He showed a clip from a TED Talk. That's it. And in the TED Talk it said that the consciousness, that what we think is consciousness, is our brain fooling us. It's a projection of all of our experiences in a bunch of background crap that's projected out and pretend. So you can't trust your consciousness doesn't exist. So there is no you that's listening to this and hopefully listening to this and processing what I'm saying. There's no you. There's just your brain. You're duped. We're all duped. It's the same thing with free will. When they asked about that, he had no answer. Oh, it depends on what you mean by free will, and this and that can answer the question, because we all think we have free will, but we don't. So what we really, really are in naturalism, once again I'll say, and I've said it over and over on my podcast, what we really are just relatively evolved primates that are absolutely controlled by the laws of physics. That's it. Now, they don't really believe this because they come to a debate to convince people they're wrong. They say things like, and he said this all through the night, your brain. There is no your, Hester. There's no your to the your brain. There's just the brain in that body. They cannot grasp this. They are overwhelmingly, incessantly hypocritical. You can't have a youre in a brain. He really did think he was right, and that science freed him. But he can't be right because there's no such thing as right or wrong. There's just what the laws of physics force the brain chemistry and the brains in this body to do and to think and to say. This kind of nonsense is everywhere. This belief that there's no such thing as consciousness, or if I can just tell them the brain does this and that, it's immediately, instantaneously self-refuting. It's self-refuting. This has been talked about in philosophy of science for a long time. But of course, not everyone's a specialist in everything, and most scientists, at least every debate and article and blog, I don't ever hear or read them. They have no clue about anything when it comes to the philosophy of science, and they certainly have no idea about how to read the Bible. They are horrible at reading the Bible. They have no idea what it means, how to read it. They don't know anything about it. They don't want to. They don't care. But of course, they speak confidently, and I'm an astrophysicist, and people, whoa. Anyway, so that's one thing he did that I'm trying to encourage you. When you hear that kind of stuff, listen very carefully when a person says things like, well, consciousness isn't real, or we don't really have a soul, we're just a brain, it's moving and so forth. If that's the case, I would say, then why trust it? And they're going to say, well, because it works. You don't know that it works. You don't know that it works. Your brain is forcing this sense of consciousness and forcing you to have the sensation that it works. There's no you to think it works. Be consistent now. If there is no you, stop acting like you're a you, because there is no you. What's coming out of your mouth right now is driven by the laws of physics and billions of years of evolutionary impulses all over from the galaxy all the way up to human beings. There's no you, and there's no rationality, and there's no TED Talk need. There's no consciousness. We're not discovering anything. We're dancing to the tune of our DNA. That's it. That's it. So, oh well. Now my response is that's all nonsense. It's utter nonsense. It's false, gibberish, gallimacious. You need evidence for that. It's just, it's just absurd. The idea that I'm not conscious right now, thinking my own thoughts right now, is absolute gibberish nonsense. But you have to believe nonsense when you're a naturalist. You have to believe that. Another thing he did, which happens all the time when you talk to naturalists, is to say, well, what happened was, tens of thousands of years ago, when the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthal, he shows a picture of like monkeys and chimps and humans and whatever, and they had to believe these things. I always want to ask them, how do you know that? How do you know what anyone was thinking 10,000 years ago? What conceivable evidence do you have to demonstrate what anyone was thinking thousands of years before written language? Is he time traveling? But see, naturalists have to say stupid things like this because you have to believe this. You have to believe this because you're a naturalist. Every cause to every effect is in nature. Now, you have to believe that per se, sorry. You have to believe something like that. You have to believe something like that. It came from DNA, ancestry, laws of physics. It can't come from outside of this because this is all there is. And so you have to say dumb things like this. But, of course, no one challenges it. They go, oh, okay, and they nod their head. Well, all these things they're talking about, all that, here's what came from, here's what came from, here's where it came from. Craig rightfully said, the first thing out of his mouth was something along the lines of, I don't think I've ever heard so many genetic fallacies committed in one speech. And I was so stinking glad he said it. Every single thing he said was genetic fallacy. If you don't know what that is, I'll remind you. The genetic fallacy has nothing to do with genes per se, but it has genetic in the sense of origin. It's when a person seeks to discredit a propositional statement because they can discover the cause of the belief. They think the origin of the belief. The origin of the belief. And so something is false or can't be trusted if I can tell you where the belief came from. If someone said, Virginia is the very best college basketball team in the country, and they go, what an idiot. Idiot. I go, what? You go, of course you think that. Your parents went to Virginia. You did too. That's why you think that. Everyone who goes to Virginia thinks Virginia's the best. That's the genetic fallacy. In this instance, of course, they're absurd wrong. Virginia, in fact, did win the championship. So they are, in fact, the best team there is. The origin of the belief is because it's based on reality, based on facts. I saw the championship. I know who won. Because my parents went somewhere is irrelevant. Now, I can believe something true even if it came from silly ideas. C.S. Lewis talks about this a long time ago in Mere Christianity, and or maybe Miracles. I think it's Mere Christianity. But it doesn't matter what it is. If a little kid says every little white thing in the food is poison, well, every little white thing in food is not poison. But what if really something is poisonous in the food? Well, she could be right to say don't eat that because there's poison in it. Well, she's right. It's just that how she came to that belief is wrong. Because one time when she was a kid, something was white, and therefore there was poisonous. Therefore, everything is poisonous if it's white. Well, that's her reasoning to get to the point is false. That's nonsense, of course. But it is true that that particular food had poison in it. So the proposition she had, the belief that that food is poisonous, was true, regardless of the origin of the belief. She could have said, I think the food is poisonous because a leprechaun told me. And come to find out there is poison in the food. Well, it's still true that there's poison in the food. The origin is irrelevant. Well, that's what he did, and that's what everybody does. I've ever heard in my entire life who disbelieves in any kind of belief in God. You presume it. You say, okay, since we know no God exists, let's explore all the reasons why belief in God came to exist. Where did it come from? And the where did it come from commits the genetic fallacy. Well, Craig said that, and the guy responded basically, well, yeah, okay, yeah. But he seemed completely out of loop to what it was. And Craig said, well, go ahead then, define it for the audience. And he kind of defined it well. And then that was it. And Craig said, well, that's it. I mean, that's, in other words, in debate, if you were in debate class, you'd have flunked off immediately. That's horrible. Those aren't arguments. It was textbook definition of genetic fallacy. So, when you meet a person, you're talking about Christianity with a person, listen carefully to those kind of fallacies. As soon as they start saying things like this, you believe in God because they're committing the genetic fallacy. Of course you believe in consciousness because, of course you think Jesus is the only way and the truth and the life because blank. Whatever the blank is, as soon as they say because, that's it. And you look at them and say, what conclusion are you drawing from the because? Well, that's why you think that. And then you say, do you therefore think the belief is false because that's where the belief came from? Let's assume it is. That's where it came from. They go, well, yeah, that's why you believe it. So that's genetic fallacy. It does not logically follow. What you just said is nonsense. That's what fallacy means, basically. It's a non sequitur. So try again. You need to demonstrate or make an argument that, and that's what Craig said. You need to make an argument. He made no arguments whatsoever. Of course, they don't feel like they need to because why? Just clearly, God doesn't exist. Just clearly, there's no argument. And Craig helped him out here. He said, well, people do, in fact, make arguments. There's really two kinds of arguments, and really only two, against God. One you would say is, well, you have to say there's something logically incoherent in the concept of God. Something logically incoherent, that it doesn't make sense. Like there's three beings in one being, which is not what Christianity says. The second way you can try to defeat it, Christianity, is by saying that there's something that would be obviously must not be the case if God were to exist. Or does exist that should not be there, and so forth. So again, you're looking for arguments against God. And in my experience, most people don't have any arguments for it at all. They just don't know anything. They don't know an argument against. They just assume it's not. They'll flip it and say, well, you explain this right now. But again, whoever makes the claim bears the burden of proof. So if someone says God doesn't exist, it's fair to say, why do you think that? Or why do you know that? Another reflection on the discussion/debate is that Hester said what everybody says as a skeptic. I've heard it, not everybody, 100%, but in my experience is 99% of the time. And that is, whenever you bring up knowledge, they swap or make synonymous knowledge with certainty. It happens almost every single time. Craig over there is certain of God and his belief in it, but I'm not. I'm the open-minded. I just follow the evidence. This kind of nonsense you're going to encounter too if you talk to skeptics all the time. And it is nonsense. Knowledge is not synonymous with certainty. Anybody who's ever studied philosophy at all knows that that's true. Certainty is one thing. Just having knowledge of something is not the same thing. I can know something without being certain, of course. I can know it. And I won't say more about that because I have in my book and I've had discussions and on. But anyway, that's just nonsense. What happens is, of course, is what they're appealing to is all you theist types, with the implication is they're closed-minded. They're just so certain. they're closed-minded, but I'm the open-minded one. Now, my response to that is, first off, of course, that's false, but secondly, who cares if I'm closed-minded? Who cares if I'm closed-minded? What conceivable difference does it make? I cannot choose but to have this view because the laws of physics control my brain and this body. What difference does it make? Why are you bothered by that? Oh, that's right. There is no you to be bothered. Your brain is reacting chemically to what I've just said. You see how this becomes just nonsense. All of course, is. That's it. I'll wrap up for now. I'm always so impressed with Craig. Just did a fantastic job. And you don't have to be at Craig's level of intellect, education at all to be able to have informed discussions. And when you think about family members and colleagues and with whom you're speaking, you just don't have to be a know-it-all. Oh my goodness, there's so much of which I'm ignorant. You don't. But what happens a lot, what will help a lot, is when this does happen, what will help is that you prepared yourself. Just think it through a little bit. Just think it through. And I've said this again before, but I'll keep repeating it. Think about why you believe what you believe. Think about how would you articulate it. Look, are you stuck in traffic? Are you on the way to work? Well, think, turn off the radio and just think for a little bit and go, well, what would I say if someone asked me? What would I say? How would I respond? And you'll be able to think this stuff through. And if you haven't thought it through enough, we'll keep thinking. Listen to my podcast. Listen to better podcasts. Read good books. There's all kinds of ways to help. You don't have to sit back and throw your hands up and say, I don't have a clue. I don't know. I'm just going to send them to somebody else. But you can be equipped intellectually. And of course, on top of that, I'm convinced the Spirit then uses what we've learned for His good. The Spirit uses what we've learned for His good. So there we go. And then keep up the good work. I hope you can listen to that. Go to Craig's website. I'm sure it'll be up pretty soon. It's probably on YouTube already. And watch that debate. I think and dialogue. I think it's well worth your time. God bless. Well, the conversation isn't finished. You can always reach out to me on social media. Are you on Facebook? I am too. At Glimpse of the Kingdom. Glimpse of the Kingdom on Facebook. Be sure to like it and you can see updates there. Also, if you're on Twitter, check me out at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, or at Glimpse the King, at Glimpse the King. And I try my best to respond to comments and questions on there as quickly as I can. If you want more, there are many more resources on the podcast and my blog. Go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com, and you can see a full list of the podcast, and my blog is available for free. Are you active in a church right now? I'd be happy to come out to your church and do all kinds of classes and workshops there. Check out davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com for more information. And may God in His great grace give you even just a glimpse of His kingdom this week. See you next time.